everyone, and welcome to another Team Lead Talks episode. On today's episode, we have Jen Berbas of the Berbas Group in Austin, Texas. Welcome, Jen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Jen, tell us a little bit about your background and what area you're in Austin.
Okay, so we're mostly in Central Austin, although we do go out to the suburbs from Buda to Kyle and Gerald. But I live in Central Austin.
Okay, awesome. And let's talk about the question I always ask everyone on Team Lead Talks. The first question is, how did you get started in real estate? Did you have a career before? Walk us through, the genesis of Jen, the real estate agent.
Yeah, I had a really long career before. I was a trader for 16 years. So I was an options trader in Chicago. I ran risk for an options group. I got my license in 2007, right before the 2008 crash. I got my real estate license.
Good timing.
And I really wanted access to the data, right? So I'm a data nerd. And so I wanted access to the data. So I got my license so I could, get the MLS data myself. And I was one of those people that thought that they didn't need a realtor. So I bought my house without a realtor because, I was a trader. I knew everything.
Right. Of course.
In 2000.
Cool. So you were an options trader for years and years in Chicago. Mm-hmm. You live in Austin now. Yep. What made you move into Austin, and then what actually made you become an agent? Like, why did you decide to stop being an option trader and change careers?
Yeah, I was kind of sick of being the dumbest person in the room when I was options trading. Finance got to a point where I was a floor trader. I was trained to be a floor trader, and finance got to a point that if you didn't have a math PhD, it was really hard to compete. Mm-hmm. And so I was an options trader. I then I worked at one of the banks after the crash, pricing credit default swaps. And then I went into operations at Dell. I had come to UT to go to school in 1989, and Austin was always home after that. And so I wanted to be back in Austin. And so I decided to leave finance, came back to Austin and worked for Dell. Cool. And then I started thinking about finance and real estate and putting it all together with an operations bent. Mm-hmm. And then went full-time in real estate in 2013.
Okay, cool. And then talk to us about 2013. So ironically, 2013 was when I left. I worked at the Air Force for 7.5 years. I was at the Pentagon in the nuclear enterprise doing human capital initiatives. And in 2013, I decided to start a real estate team with my buddy. My reason was because this was around the same time when like HGTV had House Hunters and all those new cool shows. And we were like, that's awesome. Real estate is sweet. So was there like a specific, did you have a friend that was like, hey, you should try real estate in 2013? That was like the catalyst that kind of made you, or was it just like your own initiative?
So we had been acquiring real estate for a while, right? Since about 2000, we'd been buying rental properties. And for us, the portfolio got to a point where I just needed to focus on it full time. Okay. And then I started, because I had my license, friends were asking me about it. And I was like, wait a second, I really want to focus on this full time. I think I can use my operations background. I mean, if you were in the military, operations and systems and processes are kind of,
Yeah. So I was a civilian. I don't want to act like I was an enlisted officer. So to be clear, I was a civil servant. Okay. But yes, that is where I kind of like how you took your finance background and applied it into real estate. Because the military is all about systems, all about following checklists, et cetera. So I was able to build out SOPs or playbooks that we call it from my time in the military. So that I resonate with that. But all right, so let's go to 2013. You were a portfolio manager, acquired what sounds like a lot of property yourself for your personal portfolio, I'm assuming. Yep. But then you became a realtor, an agent, right? Yeah. Did you start as a solo agent? Did you join a team? Walk us through what happened.
I actually started as somebody's assistant. And what I really liked about that is I got exposure. Now, knowing what I know now, I should have been more purposeful about that and intentional and done that even earlier, right? Okay. But when you work on a larger team, you get to see more data samples, right? So you learn faster than you would as an individual agent. I don't think people realize that. So I was somebody's assistant for 2 years. I ran their operations, and I actually prefer that role. I prefer to be the person that gets somebody ready for a meeting, than being the front person. And so I did that for 2 years, and then it was really working well for me. And so I went out on my own.
Cool. So you're an assistant. Did I hear you say you're assistant to like a high volume, high transaction team?
Yeah, somebody that had their own brokerage. And so I got that kind of visibility and I was his right hand and I just loved it. It was great.
Awesome. Yeah. A lot of the times, and this is something that I always regret when we started back in 2013, we thought from our listening, watching experience of HGTV shows, we thought we knew everything. So we didn't need a team. We didn't need a coach. But on a lot of these episodes, for those of you who might be listening to this one, if you are just getting into real estate in 2023, going into 2024, highly, highly recommend, kind of like you learned from the broker that you attached yourself to and you expedited your learning curve, probably 5-10 years, no joke. When I say that, get a coach, get a mentor if you can't afford a coach, or if you don't know anyone, reach out to teams that are successful that that are in your neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest piece of advice that I can give any new agent, because that learning curve is tough. We did it on our own for like a year, 2 years, and we had no clue what we're doing. Wasting so much time, energy, money, most importantly, not knowing if we were going to make it out. But the second we got a coach, it sort of changed the trajectory of our entire careers because of that reason alone.
Even a job as an operations assistant, right? An operations person, a listing coordinator, you're getting paid for an apprenticeship if you do that. That's incredible. Right. Yeah. Just think about anything else that any services you go use, right? Somebody uses a therapist, somebody uses, I don't know, a CPA. They have 12 things that they've learned over the years that keep you from making really easy mistakes.
Yeah.
And you get to learn that really easily when you're with a team. So I think it's fantastic.
It's an expensive learning process if you're doing it on your own, but if you are attached in a capacity on a team, it's free sometimes and you're actually getting paid like you just said. So that is a great way to kind of break into it. And who knows, you might advance in that team. Not everyone wants to start their own, but you did after 2 years.
Yeah, I did.
So you were running the operation. Were you licensed at that time as an administrator?
I was. I've been licensed since 2007 when I first started, but then again in 2014.
Yeah. Okay. So you did that in a licensed capacity. You're an admin for the team leader or the owner. Did you do any real estate deals in those 2 years?
I did. And it's kind of funny because at the end I was like, I don't know if I'm good enough to be on my own. And I had done, I think like 6 million that year.
Okay.
He was like, yeah, you are. But I had no idea, right? Because I always did a very poor job of going and seeing the broader landscape. I should have been interviewing more people, having more coffees with other agents just to see what does this look like when it's done well?
Yeah.
What am I aiming for?
Yeah. That's the key. Look, especially if you're going to attach yourself to an existing team that in your eyes is successful, right? There are varying degrees of what success looks like to everyone. But if they're doing business, they've been in business for a long time, there are other people probably in that same brokerage or on different teams or in your area that are doing the same thing. One of the biggest things is like, it's not rocket science. Like it's a business. There's marketing, there's training, conversion, right? Going to talk to those people, you'd be surprised. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm new. I'm trying to learn. More often than not, they're willing to meet with you at least once, right?
Yeah.
To tell you their experience and how they did it. And you can use that to build your own business the way you want with your tweak to it, right?
I actually had coffee with somebody yesterday. So I had coffee with somebody yesterday and kind of explained to them something I don't think I fully understood until the last year or two. If you think about, we always talk about the funnel, right? And at the very far end, left end of the funnel is lower quality leads. People pay from Zillow, whatever, right? Any kind of lead procurement program. And it's a volume thing. It's not a quality thing. And as the funnel gets a little bit more fine tuned closer to the right, I've always worked by referral. 85% of my business is by referral. That is a completely different way of running a business than people do further left. And be intentional about what you enjoy about this business and go talk to the people that are executing it the way you hope to execute it.
Right.
Because those are different skills but be really purposeful.
Yeah, I agree. I'll admit, I wish going back to 2013, we did very high level transactions, a lot of volume, but we focused on like the left side, like you said. We did paid direct mail campaigns, PPC campaigns, almost transactional level, without focusing on the referral piece. But in hindsight, being 2020, I wish we had done both and really focused on the clients, the happy clients that we met with, and stayed in touch with them, because that could have been a really good supplemental business line, revenue line, right? Not to mention, you mentioned 85% of your business coming from your sphere or referrals,
Right.
very low costs, and in some cases, high conversion, because it's their friend or family member saying, "Hey, I worked with Jen." And it's not that competition that you would get from like a Google PPC lead, for example. So that probably makes your life or conversion rates that much better to begin with, right?
It does. It makes the conversion rates different, but it's really, from an operations perspective, it's a different way of doing business. It's different software.
Right.
It's different, activities that you're doing throughout the day. Right. And so some people would really enjoy that aspect further left on that funnel. For me, this kind of happened organically. It wasn't like I set out to do this. It just happened.
Right.
But now what I'm telling people is be thoughtful about what you enjoy and talk to agents that have succeeded in the part of the funnel where you want to work.
Exactly. And I would also mention, do whatever lane you pick, whether you only want to do Google PPC or SEO, whatever, or referrals, get really, really good at that first before you kind of chase this shiny object and have 5 different things. And then you're not doing those 5 things the best that you can possibly do. So kind of like master one, move on to the next, move on to the next. So slow. You want to move fast, but you want to be methodical and deliberate, like you said, in how you're approaching.
I'm doing that now. I've tried a couple different things just because I want to see what is the next thing we're going to add to our toolbox.
Right.
And so I felt like this fall I tried, just a ton of different things. And now I have to be refocused. I learned a bunch of technical, pieces of software, strategies, ideas. Now I have to refocus for 2024 and decide how I'm going to spend my time and the team's time.
Yeah. Maybe we can come back to that around your A/B testing of new softwares or lead generation vehicles. But I'd like to, if we can, stay on that first year in your real estate. You said you did about 6 million in volume, but let's talk about, where did your first deal come from? Can you walk us through how you acquired it and what it looked like for you?
Yeah, my first deal was my first transaction. I always like to use the word transaction. I don't know, for some reason, deal feels so transactional to me.
Sure.
So but my first transaction came from, it was actually a referral from the broker I was with. But by that point, I had, exposure to 7 or 8 transactions with him. So I already had an idea about the due diligence that needed to be done, et cetera. And then I guess maybe even before that, before 2013, I did a handful of transactions where I represented myself.
Gotcha. When you're purchasing your own portfolio. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you technically had some experience closing transactions under your belt before you worked with a third party or like a new client, right?
Right. And I'm glad I did. I don't think I would have enjoyed learning on somebody else, right? I mean, you learn every day in this business. I've been doing this for a really long time, and I still feel like there's every day where I learn something new. But I'm really glad I got to try learn on myself,
right?
Especially with regards to due diligence, because that's the stuff that keeps me up at night. And so.
Yeah. So how did that come about though? So you worked with this broker, and then you had a conversation and said, "Hey, I think I want to look into being a real estate agent." And he said, "Well, here's a referral." Was that how that happened?
No, I was actually, I was leaving Dell because I wanted to focus on real estate in my own portfolio. And I had talked to him about just who do you know that's hiring an assistant? And I went and interviewed with somebody who called him to check up on, just for a referral check.
Yeah.
And they said that I was a little informal and they were worried that I might go to some fancy neighborhood and get somebody's nose out of joint because, I was too casual. And he seemed to take umbrage with that. And then he said, "Never mind, come work with me." So nice. I worked as his assistant for a year. And then there was some overflow business he couldn't take because he was going out of town. And he said, "You're fine. You go ahead and take this. You run with this one." And awesome. It worked out great. And I don't even know if she knows she was my first client.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you're like, should I tell them? But you don't want to, you got to maintain that level of professionalism and make sure that they're comfortable with what's happening. But yeah, I'm sure people have said that before and regretted it, and vice versa.
Absolutely. You can't take anything back, right? So once it's said, you've rung that bell, you just got to keep it to yourself.
Exactly. Well, that's really cool. So you got your first deal from not a personal, closing under your belt. and then 2 years go by, you learned a lot. And you also took a lot from your prior career. And then what was the kind of the tipping point where you said, I think I'm ready to move on? And what did that look like? Did you just break off as a solo agent? Did you start a team right away? Can you talk about that 2 year point?
Yep. I broke off as a solo agent. I just decided I had done some investigating, and there seemed to be some brokerages in town, and one in particular that did a really good job of operationalizing like the lower layer. I don't want to say lower layer, but like some fundamentals of what we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure a newsletter got sent out to our clients, making sure we were put in front of them with postcards every week, every month. And so I was like, oh, okay. So they're going to take some of this operational piece off my plate. So I don't have to worry about that.
The brokerage you were thinking about or wound up moving to handle that aspect
Correct.
of touches
Yep.
for you?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I always think of brokerages almost like software as a service, right? And so like what feature set was I looking for? And they covered a lot of the bases for some of so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I didn't have to figure out a postcard campaign. I didn't have to figure out a newsletter. And so that was really great for me because coming from an operations background, I knew that would, that kept me to fewer swim lanes, right, as an individual. So I went there. And then once I got to about the 10 or 15 million point is when I realized I was going to need some help. And so I had met somebody actually at the orientation for that brokerage, and who was actually who was willing to train my sister in how to be an assistant. And then through the course of meeting her, that relationship grew, and she ended up being my first hire.
Cool. So did you say your sister?
My sister was initially my assistant.
Uh-huh. Okay. But your sister was your first hire?
She was my first hire. Yep. Cool. And then, yeah, absolutely. I should say that my sister was my first hire, which was great because she's like a 20-year younger version of me. And she can read my mind. So she does things exactly the way I would do them.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Really nice. Leveraging that. So there's always like an argument, or not an argument, but different points of view or approach to who your first hire should be. A lot of people say an assistant. Our first hire on our team was actually an ISA, an inside sales agent.
Really? Okay.
So we built a pipeline because we did a lot of outbound marketing with inbound, direct response. And it got to the point where, and when I say I started it with my best friend from high school, Dan. So we built this together. So we were almost like in a partnership right away. So we started with two, not solo. But so we got really good and I remember we found some guy in Chicago actually who did direct mail. We found him on like Facebook, and the letter was like handwritten, but it went out, said whatever it said, and it got really good response rates. And then at that point, it got to just too overwhelming for us to be going on appointments, working with clients, closing deals, and following up with our big pipeline. So we came to a fork in the road. And we're like, well, an assistant or an ISA. But for us, we needed a return on investment from that campaign because it was expensive to send out thousands and thousands of pieces of mail. So we thought, what would be a better approach? A revenue generating or someone to just leverage tasks or things that we didn't have time for. And that's when we went with the ISA route. So it's always interesting to hear, who your first hire was. But enough about me.
When you're saying that, though, it's making me think, different parts of the funnel, right?
Right, exactly.
So you had this incoming volume. You created a problem that you needed to solve, almost a good problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Me, I was moving a little bit slower, and it was organic growth instead of like an external impetus.
Yeah.
And for me, it was the assistant because we were at that end of the funnel.
So our needs were completely different based on our approach to how we were generating our leads.
Yeah.
So there it is right there. But you're leveraging your time, right? You're in essence buying back your time by having your sister become your assistant. What did you start out? And I know you were an assistant, so you probably had, your systems and processes, if not codified, written down in somewhere, probably in your mind at least, right?
But I had an Excel spreadsheet or 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So like plug and play, but what kind of things did she take off your plate, and what did that allow you to do?
Organizing the database, right? Making sure that you're categorizing people correctly, making sure that your database is complete with birthdays, with things like that, home anniversaries when people closed. So that's where she started, and she was probably 20 to 30 hours a week. And then over time, the next hire too, what we did is we started documenting all of the way we did business. So how do you execute the business?
Right.
And that was a big step for me. That felt like I had a handle then on what we were doing. I don't like mistakes. I get super anxious around a mistake. And so for me, having that process documented was really important.
Could you talk about that? I have an
Yeah.
inclination of what you're referring to, which I love, by the way, but what do you mean by that in your
Yeah.
business?
So what do you do once somebody is under contract for a buyer, right? What are the
Mhm.
steps that you take? I think a lot of people say, "Oh yeah, I do that too," and they say, "Well, I do that. I don't need to document it." But the problem is we don't have the discipline to do it exactly the same every time. And if
Right.
you're not referencing a checklist, you may miss something. I do that, and I'm like my own worst client. When I go buy a house, it make my team crazy because I'm like off in la la land and I'm not following the process. And they're like, "Hey, you forgot about this."
Right.
But I won't do that with a client. With a client, we have to follow the process exactly.
Yep.
And when you're getting a listing prepared, right, the process starts differently. The process starts right when you have a listing agreement signed. That's when the starting gun for us to do our work. And then
Hmm.
you need to follow that process exactly the same every time.
Yep.
Because if you don't, you're changing your recipe for what you're making and then you have unpredictable outcomes, and that's not great.
Exactly. And if something goes awry, if you don't have what you're referring to SOPs, standard operating
Mm-hmm.
procedures. In our team and in our businesses, we call them playbooks, same thing.
Yeah.
But if something goes awry, at least you can do an internal audit and have a better idea of what happened or what went wrong and where by saying, okay, Jen, this happened. Did you do, and say there's 5 things in that particular SOP. Did you do this? Yes. Did you do that? Yes. Did you do this? Oh, I didn't do that. Okay, well, why? And then you're like, you're figuring out or triaging it in an approachable manner versus me and you being on the same team and something goes bad for both of us and we're like, well, what did you do? I'm like, I shot
Yeah.
from the
Kind of
hip.
wing it.
I
Yeah.
didn't follow anything. But
Yeah.
that is checklists and SOPs I've gotten really, really into the last year or so in the businesses that we have for that reason. So number one, knowing what to do, but also what you just said, like you put this stuff together for training purposes and onboarding new teammates. How easy is your life going to be if you can hire a new assistant or hire a new marketing coordinator and be like, hey, new person, here's a library of SOPs for every single thing that you would need to do, but you're now the owner of them. How
Right.
much stress does that relieve? And
Oh, it's
it
incredible.
keeps you from, leaving your position for a week or two, hand
Yeah.
holding someone.
And it gives people something to research and come back with questions, right? They can
Right.
help themselves instead of asking you everything. Are you familiar with the book Checklist Manifesto? I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of the idea.
I've read so many different books, but yes, yeah, I have that one too.
Yeah, and I love that idea, right? I mean, pilots use it; they use it in operating rooms. Why make the easy mistakes? Make
Yeah.
new, different mistakes. Don't make the old easy mistakes.
Yeah. 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 So I also have a really good book called, so I'm in a coaching program. I'll drop it. It's SaaS Academy. I have a
Okay.
SaaS company as part of our business, line. But the owner actually wrote a book called Buy Back Your Time. And he uses the 4 C's of a playbook, which I've now implemented into ours. But it's the camcorder method. And this is something where the
I'm
idea
writing
here,
it
you
down.
guys, yeah, the idea here is getting something done. And this is a quote from him, not from me. I'm not as smart as he is. But 80% of something getting done is 100% awesome. So when those out there that don't maybe have a process in place or a library of these SOPs or playbooks, here's what I highly recommend. Any single time you do something for the first time, you open up a live Google Doc. We use Google Workspace. So a
Okay.
live doc, because you're going to iterate it all the time. Softwares change, things change. You want to be able to have a live doc that everyone can feed into. So that's the first thing. But I'll do a new task for the first time and I'll do the 4 C's. So camcorder method, record yourself doing it and talking to it for 3 times. It picks
Okay.
up on the little nuances. You can use Loom to do that, which is great. It screen records and will, if you get the AI version, it will actually put it into chapters and transcribe it, which is also cool. And then you say, okay, now here's the checklist, what has to happen, the cadence of when they have to happen, And then, oh shoot, I always forget one of the C's. Um, Checklist, cadence, camcorder. Shoot, it's like a task, the task that you have to do, but there's a C word for
Maybe
it.
it's communicate with the.
Not communicate. Maybe it'll pop into my mind. But basically, it's like, here's 3 videos that if I don't want to do it anymore and there's someone better, maybe Jen, you're going to do it. I'm like, here's the SOP. You go, you watch the videos, then it says, here's the checklist of things to do. So go do this, go do that, go do this. And then the cadence, when it needs to be done, every day, every week, or whatnot. And then, actually, the last one is the checklist. The second one is the items, the action items, but there's a C word for action items. The checklist is your quality check that you can do yourself. So it's like, okay, after you've completed task A, B, C, right? Did you email the client? Did you schedule this? Did you do that? And there's like however many final questions that you can ask yourself to say, oh, shoot, I didn't send the client that email. Oh, good that it's in here. So we do that for every single new task we have. And on top of that, are you familiar? You seem to be a little tech savvy. So are you familiar with Scribe? Have you heard of Scribe now?
No.
So in the past, what we have done for like this kind of approach is I'll say, hey, I need to, onboard someone new, and I'll screenshot and then I'll copy and paste it and do this. Scribe, well, you can use Scribe and Loom simultaneously, by the way. So you're recording and scribing, but Scribe takes screenshots every single time you click the mouse.
Oh, cool.
So it is
we use Loom for that, for our training videos.
Yeah. So it's like Loom, but it's also producing a checklist with screenshots that you can PDF or share. And then you can even type instructions into it after the fact, but it'll pick up on what you're doing and what you're saying. So we throw all that in there. Long story short, we built a library by department. So marketing, operations, sales, etc. And we just continue to grow our library every single time something new happens so that you can scale, right? The end result of any SOP, in my opinion, is that's how a business really scales, by having those in place so you can hire someone new and they can get embedded into your company 99% faster than, oh, I need to hire Jen as a marketing coordinator. Let me spend a month figuring out what the heck I'm even going to tell Jen to do, versus as long as I'm just working it anyways and clicking a few buttons, like it embeds, like right now, there's a button for Loom, a button for Scribe I can turn on, go into our CRM on Salesforce and just start clicking. And then that's done for me. That's awesome. I'm doing it anyways, and it's spitting out all this great information, and I plug and play it into our playbook library.
We 2 things that you said made me think of something I've told my team in the past. You were talking about 80% of something being done is great, right? People think that when you're talking about process, you mean you need to have every single scenario, an answer for every scenario, and you don't, right? What you're trying to do is capture 80% of the events that you're going to see. Sometimes, and what that does, because you do have all that process documented, is it frees up the team to handle the 20% of things that are just going to happen in life. You're not trying to cover every eventuality. You're trying to get like the middle part of the curve, not the tails.
That's the whole point. Yeah. You can't get too granular and log in and do this specific thing. Cumbersome. It's the idea. And I snuck into my workspace real quick. The second C is called the course. The course is the high level action items that need to happen. So it's camcorder method, the course, the cadence, and the checklist.
Okay.
So we follow that. And we even have a playbook to build playbooks, where we walk people through that ideology and the theory of why a playbook is important. So, but yeah, I agree. The entirety of a playbook isn't to step by step, because what's going to happen? Step 13 will change, and then you have to go back in and mess with it. But if you're just like, hey, high level, when we sign a listing, we need to do all these things, like put a lockbox on, order photos, get a cleaner over. At least you're not missing that. So 80% of like what we've been talking about gets accomplished on repeat, right? The idea for us is predictable, repeatable, which equals scalable.
And you don't have to worry. Like if I go out I know I'm going out to a house, I'm going to drop off a lockbox. I don't have to sit there and think about what else goes with that. I have a place to go look at my checklist. And so it just frees up your mental energy for other things. Something else we said too about leveraging your time. The last brokerage I was at, I enjoy teaching. And so I would talk to agents too that were in different growth phases of their business, right? People that were in that 10 to 15 million point that were getting their first assistant. And at that, by the way, that 10 to 15 million point is going to vary a lot by market. In Austin, that happens to be, probably average price point for agents, 600,000. That happens to be about 20 transactions a year, right? Okay. So once you get beyond that, you need a little bit more help in some way.
Yes.
One of the things I was always telling people is, what do you make an hour? And you should know that, right? You should know what you made. It's not a very hard calculation. Divide it by 2,000 or divide it by 3,000 as the case may be. But what do you make an hour? Well, hire out people at less than that by the hour to do things like your birthday card, like whatever, there are little pieces you can break off that really free you up. And then that increases what you make an hour. And people don't think about it that way. They think they're saving money and they're really not. I mean, even if you can free your emotional energy up to go out for a walk with your dog or your family, even that's a win.
Yeah, that's an excellent approach. I've actually started to implement that not only in my business career, but personal life as well. Yeah. So like it's your buyback rate, your hourly rate. Mm-hmm. If I'm 100, the rule of thumb just out there, and this is, to each his own here, but if you can get someone at 25% of your total, so if I'm hypothetically 100 and I need to get someone at 25 to do something, it's worth your time. And it's true. It's not just so I can go out and get more business and grow my business, but it's also so I can go to my kid's football game on Sunday, right? To do whatever it is you want to do. If you don't like I like mowing my lawn, so I do it, but I don't like clearing all the leaves off. So I calculate that and say, hey, where can I save a few hours? And then I take my kids to the park. Or I go watch a movie with do whatever you want to do.
It's also more efficient. There's a certain amount of friction, I think, that we have in this business from switching gears. If somebody is out showing houses, when a big growth phase for our team was when I didn't have to come home and do paperwork at 6:00 at night after I got out of the field from showing houses, right? I was out in the field all day long, and then I'd come home, and I didn't even realize it at the time because my husband was working in a different city, but I was showing houses all day. And then in the evening, I was working until 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And then when he moved back to Austin, I was like, oh, wait a second. I didn't realize I was working so much. And so I hired somebody that could be doing that paperwork while I was in the field. And then I also wasn't having the gear switching because you would stop at a coffee shop to do a contract and your brain has to adjust to this new workflow.
Yeah.
And so it just makes you more efficient because you're doing one thing all the time. It's a little bit more. Assembly line is not a great word for it, but just like a little bit more focused and effective.
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind there. Number one, that's going to help tremendously with you not being burned out, right? Mm-hmm. And basically just working yourself to death and being super tired.
Oh yeah, I was well on my way there. Yeah.
Yeah, showing people all day is exhausting. Like getting in your car, out of your car, mentally, it's just exhausting. Coming home and then doing paperwork. I can't imagine one human being having the ability to do that for years and years and years. And then also, you might not like doing paperwork, but there could be someone that has, the disc personality. They have what, an I or a C or whatever it is. In this case, it's paperwork. Some people love doing that. And some people love following checklists and love saying, okay, I'm doing the same thing on repeat. So go find someone at 25% of your rate or whatever you want to do, 10%, 30, whatever, but just make it happen. And then you're happier, they're happier. Your clients can feel you being happier and more attentive because you're not thinking, oh, shoot, I have to go home. I'm supposed to go to dinner with my friends, but I have 3 hours of paperwork in my mind because that's going to eat at you pretty quick.
I think our clients really benefit from having all these brains working on their project, right? You don't have just one person. So, I make a certain kind of mistake. This is something I've learned, over the years as a professional. There's a certain type of mistake I make but I have people around me that don't make those kinds of mistakes, right? Yeah. So you have me who's a more strategic thinker. You have very detailed people around me that are very good to follow, very good with checklists and follow them to the T, better with contracts than I am. We have processes in place to double check contracts. Yeah. So no contract goes out without two humans looking at it, right? So you have this whole team, you have 3 or 4 brains coming to bear on your transaction. And the way we actually work is that 2 or 3 people work on a transaction, both on the listing side and the buyer side. And I think our clients get a huge benefit from that.
I mean, it's true. Look at any other business. I hate to always use this analogy, and I feel like in these episodes I sometimes reiterate the same thing, but like a doctor's office, you almost expect someone to greet you, someone to set the appointment, someone to handle billing, someone to check you in, then the doctor sees you and they're focusing on like your health, which is super important. And this is true in a law firm, in a service, like a car service department, etc. Why not implement that same model as a real estate agent? I find it kind of funny that some people are always like, and to each his own here, and I don't mean anything by this, but you talk to an agent, they're like, I'm so busy, I'm running around all the time. I don't know how I'm going to do this. And I'm like, well, how many deals did you close this month? And they're like, 2. I'm like, well, do you have any processes? Do you have any help? Do you have any this? And they feel like they have to do it on their own for whatever reason. But in my opinion, this is just my personal opinion, when we work with a client and a big part of what you're just describing, Jen, is like setting proper expectations and not blindsiding the client. So this is how we operate. And you can use an analogy like you've set a doctor's appointment, right? You're not setting it with the doctor. We operate the same way. So once we go under contract, Amanda or John or whoever is going to handle your contract to close. They're amazing. They're awesome. You're going to love that, hype them up, make them feel comfortable with it. But they know and expect that that's how you roll, right?
Right.
And that's, in my opinion, a professional look for a real estate team or an agent, having team members.
The benefit for the client too. Do you want to be completely dependent on, if we had a death in our family 2 weeks ago, an extended family? Do you want to be completely, life happens. Right. I want you to have continuity of service. I don't want the continuity of the service that you get to depend on, my father-in-law being 90 years old.
Right. One person.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just think it's just so much better for them. And internally, as soon as I got very comfortable with it and I didn't feel like I was apologizing for something, we get to educate the public on what is really high touch, white glove real estate service. Mm-hmm. We get to define that. And once I got comfortable with it about 5 years ago, and I didn't feel like I was apologizing for being a one-person show, which now seems ridiculous to me, but I almost felt like I was apologizing before. Nobody ever questioned it, and our clients love it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the cool thing about being an entrepreneur and having your own real estate business is you can kind of make it whatever you want to make it. Yeah. If you just want to be on your own, like, go do it. And you can close 100 deals a year. Hopefully you have some software on the back end helping you, because that sounds like, nowadays to me, it sounds like a nightmare doing that by yourself. But I think it's cool. And not to mention, you're like working with like-minded people. You're building this culture. You're building a team that you can have fun with. You're not alone, right?
No. Yeah, the camaraderie is amazing. I love that about my team. It's kind of cute when somebody goes on vacation. When they get back, they're really kind of excited. Yes, of course, everybody would like to be on permanent vacation, but I just enjoy watching them enjoy working together.
That's really nice. Cool. Yeah. Everyone has their responsibilities. Also, if you have that structure, especially what it sounds like on your team, there's room for growth too in your team, where you could start as an admin assistant and kind of learn the business, maybe go to marketing coordinator, listing coordinator, transaction coordinator, and then grow out your own line of revenue and be your own business. So there's ample ways to do it, but I love your approach. And I honestly think I studied like a lot of CEOs that have scaled large, and more often than not, the common denominator of when they were like, how did you take your company from 0 to 100 million or $1 billion? And it was like, we systematized literally how to make popcorn in the kitchen. Yeah. And it's funny, but you look at someone who does that and how efficient, like peel back the onion in your business. And I'm like, wow, this is a really well-oiled machine, versus like someone who doesn't. You're like, how are you even closing these deals? Like it's a miracle that that's even happening. And then there's like
stressful.
Everywhere.
When you watch it, it's stressful.
And then there's everything in between, right? Yeah. Yeah. And that's oh, go ahead.
One of the things we've been doing too is I started noticing that there's probably a lot of people out there my age who never built the team, right? Never did that. And they're operating as a one-man shop. And so one of the other things I'm exploring is basically creating a collective with them where they use my systems and my operations and kind of plug into us.
Oh,
Let
that's
me
cool.
manage, it's not hard for the person that does my birthday cards or my gifts to add 10% more. Let's do that. Let's bring it in. Let's, instead of reinventing the wheel at this point in your career, let's just use this machine that's already been built, and it's just far more efficient.
Yeah, that's cool. Almost like not a JV, but like you're offering your operating system to people to leverage, so they can not have to invest or go through what we just talked about, but they can leverage what you spent the last 10 years doing and building, and really making it down to like a science almost with these playbooks they have.
But like super client centric. It's not about the systems and the process and the operations. It's really about delighting the client. Making sure that they just feel like they've been taken care of at every step. And sometimes some of our reviews and our referrals back from our clients are talking about how, sorry, can't think of the word now, but basically how quickly we respond to them, right? How responsive we are to them.
Cool.
But you do that with systems.
Yeah. All this stuff allows you to be more proactive than reactive, which is huge. There's a difference in a business being reactive and basically running around with your head cut off, trying to figure out, oh, this just happened. Then you spend a day in lost productivity because you don't have that in place, to being like, hey, everything's kind of running great. Why don't I plan with my marketing person a client event? Because you have all this free time. It's really funny. When we first implemented, we did like a super high custom built out CRM that was very, very efficient. And I always joke, like, you never really know how much time you're freeing up until you take a step back and kind of pause. But by having this in place, you're like, wow, because I used to go home and do paperwork until like 11 and 12 myself, like guilty of it before I knew what I knew now. But over time, as you get better and you learn from, like, someone listening to this podcast might listen to something you just said and be like, oh, wow, I'm going to reach out to Jen and take advantage of her OS platform that she is offering up today. You never know. That could free them up. And then 2 months go by and they're like, wow, my life is black. Like, I took a 180. And I think it all is how organized, at the end of the day, how organized you approach problems or solutions. And that's all part of your systems that you have.
One of the like philosophical points I bring up to the team all the time, and this was early on when we were developing our processes, is think about every time a client asks a question, think about that as an opportunity to improve our process. Because if they're constantly asking questions and we're reacting to them, could we have done something before then to educate them so they always feel like we're one step ahead of them? We are anticipating their need, right? And because that's how and then when you do that, you were just talking about, when you sit back and things are kind of on, I don't want to say autopilot, but they're running well, you have more time. You also aren't as reactive and stressed out. Think about the time that you had a transaction that something went poorly and you realized you made a mistake that you could have avoided. And that feeling of like, you feel flushed, you don't feel, everybody has a different way they feel when they're kind of triggered like that. How much emotional space that takes up that you could be using for other things. And when you have good process, it never happens anymore.
Yeah. Almost too, like along the line of like questions that come in from clients for the most part. And I know there's like very specific specific questions that they would ask, but there's high level that all new buyers ask, that all homeowners ask. What we did and we thought was kind of cool was we did like an FAQ, like a frequently asked questions kind of thing. But as we started to get them in over time, and this was like years and years, so it wasn't just like in a week, but we would categorize them with like, listing questions or photography questions. And then we use that as marketing or branding when we met with people, like on our first or second appointment, to be like, hey, we know being a new buyer can be scary. Here's what most of our new buyers ask. And it was like a marketing lead behind that maybe set us apart, maybe didn't, who knows. But that's sort of like what we were able to do because we weren't focused on like the nitty gritty details. And we're like, hey, it would be cool if we had like an FAQ for first home buyers. And of course,
the first thing, the first thing to do is be organized enough to have that spreadsheet with like the different categories. Because if you have the framework, then you can kind of collect the ideas easily over time. And people don't realize that. They think it's like you sit down and just write all that out, and you don't. You create the framework and you collect it over time. And then in 6 months, it turns into something great.
Exactly. Honestly, one of the biggest things that these, like having a playbook or a system really helped with as a team leader with a lot of agents and a lot of ISAs and a lot of admin was not having to have the exact same conversation with like 10 different agents on the team. It was like, hey, what about, interest rates in 2021? What's happening? What should I tell people? So we would have that conversation once, write it out, put it into like our systems. And then when someone asks, we're like, well, did you go and look at sales? And, specifically, here's the link, go read about it, or just Google it, that kind of thing.
Or let me record a Loom for you one time and you can watch it 20 times and I just saved myself 20 hours.
Exactly. Because very, very early on, we had the exact same conversation with every single person because it's hard. We obviously would try to have that in the team meeting, but imagine like having it once and then just being like, hey, Jen, here, I just talked to Barry about this. Like, here it is. Here's your answer. Watch it, read it, and then come back if you have any further questions for us.
There was a time in 2021 when everything was just going bonkers, right? Interest rates were really low. And I was getting maybe 5 or 6 calls a week from California that were, I want to come to Austin. I want to buy a $400,000 investment property and I need it to be cash flow positive.
Mm-hmm.
And I built a tool that allows me to kind of, figure out where things are trading, just because from the trader background, and see how cash flow positive or negative things are, right?
Yeah.
And so I know there wasn't anything that was cash flow positive, and I'm not going to spend days and days and days looking for something when I know it doesn't exist, especially in that market. And so I got to a point where I just recorded my buyer's presentation with me walking through the data and the reason why, because I had lost my voice. I was doing 5 to 6 of those a week and I was losing my voice and I was like, I can't do this. This is nuts. So I recorded it and sent it to people, not for a shortcut, but so I could communicate with them effectively and they'd get the information they needed. So they didn't waste their time looking for something that I knew didn't exist.
Yeah. Perfect. That's an exact example of how you can buy back your time and not have to have 5 or 6 conversations a week for however long you had to do that. So that's one example. We've been talking about systems and processes for a long time, and I think this is awesome. This is what I really love, but let's talk about your team. Like, can you walk us through the dynamics, or every team is different, right? Mm-hmm. What does your team look like? How do leads flow in? How do you hold them accountable? Just a high level kind of overview here.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit of a different animal than most people expect. I stay very, very involved in the communications because for me, it's really hard to let go of that. I want to make sure that we are giving people that white glove service and that nothing ever gets dropped. I want to respond to a client text within 20 minutes. I want to respond to a client email within an hour and phone calls within the hour. So for me, that responsiveness is super important. Our team mostly works my business. And what we do is we've created that collective feel. So if somebody comes in with their own transaction, if somebody is a buyer's agent and they come in with their own transaction or referral for a listing, the listing team works on it and they get a hefty referral. And what I want to do is incentivize them for everybody to stay in their swim lane and do what they do every single day, but not take them out of their everyday work. And yet I still want people to feel like they're being compensated well for building their own book of business. The other thing that's really important to me is I don't want my team to feel like working for me was a hiatus in their sales career, if that's not what they want, right? Yep. So what I bring their database in, it gets all the same treatment as my database, all the same gifts, all the same touches. Mm-hmm. So they feel like we are still managing their SOI and letting it grow organically.
Out of curiosity, so there's two, and we had this too. We had company leads and we had what we called agent leads, and we tagged them accordingly. Mm-hmm. Our company or our business, there are different splits, but they got the same level of, like you were saying, support. Yeah. Like they weren't on their own with their their mom or their family member or their friend. Is that kind of how, I know the support piece, but do you do the same split? Do you do different splits?
We do different splits. And what I'm really transparent with my team about what our expenses are and things like that. Cause I try to be really fair to everybody and I want to be as transparent as possible so that they also feel like everything's fair.
Okay, cool. And are they allowed to bring in as many of their own generated leads as they
it's
would
never been a
like to?
problem, but of course, I always tell people, this is also the first time I'm doing this, right? So every
Right.
once in a while I'll make a mistake and I'm like, sorry guys, I got to rework this. I didn't
Set
anticipate it.
expectations.
Yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
my very first time I'm doing this too. It's really easy to think, well, your boss has been doing this for a while and they should know better. We make mistakes,
Right.
but I sit down with people and I rework it. But we haven't had that problem yet where there's such a huge volume that it would break the system.
Yeah, it was actually funny to us because we tracked all this, so we would know what the breakdown between like a company closed transaction versus an agent closed transaction. And even though the split was better if you like brought your own family member, it was like 4% was agent driven because we were just so good. Like we never turned off our market. Like we were doing $10,000 to $15,000 a month in direct mail and PPC, and it just like never really turned it off. So the top of the funnel was always huge. And in our team, a little bit different than yours, but on our team we had dedicated roles for myself and my partner. We did marketing and high level sales, kind of just over you and making sure everything ran. But then as the leads came in, we had ISAs vetting and talking to and following up the pipeline. All our agents ever got were appointments on their calendars. So they would get invited to these appointments, be expected to do the research and due diligence and have a successful conversion rate. And there are varying degrees of like, if you meet the threshold or not. And like, that's a whole nother episode we can talk about. But then when they would sign someone, they would just turn it over to the team. So there was marketing coordinator, listing, transaction coordination team that kind of push it to the finish line. But they would always be, like you said, you'd love to be involved and know kind of the intricacies of each and every deal. The agent was responsible for being like the quarterback. But I guess long story short is they were just so accustomed to getting leads put on their calendars that we thought it was going to be like a flip because the splits were honestly so much different in their favor, but it never happened. And we just kind of rolled with it. And that's just how we operated and continue to operate.
If you have people that love their job and love what they're doing, they just want to keep doing it, right? If you hire the right people, they're not going to be accidentally incentivized by the wrong thing. And like for me, because I started growing by referral, right? And so everybody that is a 1 or 2 degrees of separation for me that's working with us, I never want to be at a social event where I get caught off guard because something's gone awry in somebody's transaction. I don't know about it. I want to feel omniscient when I walk into that. And so for me, that's a lot of why my team works out of my inbox, because I want the ability to search and know exactly what's happening in every transaction if I'm going to go see that client later this week.
Cool. So you have a different approach than my team, obviously. But walk us through, like, it sounds like when you have a client, you're the quarterback or the point person maybe, but then your team collectively just kind of works in cohesive, whatever you want to call it, to get them to the finish line. Can you walk us through what that looks like and the different roles that people are assuming when that happens?
We have 2 people, and like I kind of split the buyer's agent position into 2 parts. And they work together, right? One person though is behind the computer, scheduling the showings, making sure the documentation from MLS gets to the client, doing all the follow-up and the paperwork, and being mission control, right? And there's somebody that's out in the field at the inspection, talking through the clients through the inspection summary and wrap up, all of that kind of stuff. And they work hand in hand. And I'm really lucky. I have 2 phenomenal people that are, that work together well and enjoy working with each other. So the client comes in, I'm kind of watching the whole time. They work with them for that phase of the transaction. But I'm watching the whole time. And it's kind of funny. Sometimes I feel like, well, we just decide internally who goes to closing based on who we think the client is going to be more excited about having there. If it's a friend of mine, I might go, but a lot of times it's a friend of mine and they're like, well, where's the other part of the team members? So which is great. That means they love them. And then on the listing side, I'm probably more involved all along the way, but there's a lot of, staging and the photos and the, making sure the house is tidy before the photos that day, making sure the lighting's correct, right? I don't need to be there for that because there are also people that are better at it than me. Right. That's not my forte. I don't know how to stage a shelf.
Yeah. It's interesting about your closing part I think like on our second or third episode, I interviewed an agent that he's in the DC area. He does like 200, 300 million a year. So super high volume transaction coupled with like our systems conversation. He would actually schedule out every Thursday from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. at a title company, all of his closings in one day. So kind of along your line of like who gets to go, he would have on repeat, like, okay, 8, Mary. Okay, cool, we're closed. Like champagne, present, photo. All right, 9 o'clock, Gary, and just repeat. And he was like, it was a way for me to kind of like have fun, but it was also a way for me to like be there for
participate.
Participate.
I want to participate in that.
Yeah, get pictures for social media and to show people you're actually doing business. But I was like, I've never heard of that before. Like he dedicated, I think it was like every other Thursday, he basically
actually
booked an entire day of closings.
That's awesome. And your team has to keep that in mind when they're writing offers up front. We've actually, we put in our templates not to have closings on Mondays and Fridays. And Mondays are always such chaos because I feel like everybody catches up with the crazy from the weekend and the title companies and everybody and the lenders, right? They got to catch up too. So if you have closings on Monday, it's just chaotic. Fridays, I had read somewhere that the FBI cannot help if somebody is a victim of wire fraud as much on a Friday. Rather than other days. So I'm like, you know what? That's a good enough reason to eliminate Fridays. And if your closing gets shifted, now you've impacted there's moving trucks coming and people get upset because you've impacted the weekend. So we just do Tuesday through Thursday anyway. But yeah, I like that. That's a good idea.
That's a really good approach. I never heard about that FBI thing.
I heard it in a conference and I thought, why
don't we go with
terrible?
Yeah. It makes sense to me. So that's cool. All right. So your team kind of works as a unit to get through. How are you all communicating? Because it sounds like you're doing a lot. Everyone's kind of like doing their own thing. Everything's rocking and rolling and keeping it on track. But what are you doing to stay in communication? I know you're all operating inside of the same inbox. I don't know if you meant literally or figuratively.
No, literally.
Okay. So but what are you doing? You have people going to the house. You're not. You have people going to the closings. You're not sometimes, right? What do you do?
What we feel is best for the client. Yeah.
Right. What are you doing from a cadence of like touching base with your team? Are you holding weekly, monthly, whatever meetings? Like, how are you staying in touch?
We have part of my background was software development for finance. So I come from, a place of like stand-ups every morning. Okay. And so we like to do something quick. Right now we are doing it 4 days a week, but it's a quick run through the buyers, quick run through the sellers. And what happens then is if somebody is at lunch and something happens on the other team, everybody's kind of been made aware of what's going on with the listings and what's going on with the buyers. So something's less likely to fall through if that part of the team is out for whatever reason.
Could you walk us through your agenda? I get the big picture, like you just talk and keep each other, but did you follow like an agenda each and every time? And did everyone talk? Like what was the logistics of that stand up and how long was the stand up?
I try to keep it to less than 30 minutes. Faster is better. We just keep up that pace. And nobody wants to be in an hour meeting. That's crazy. Right. You don't need that. As fast as possible. And really, where are we? What are the key milestones? What are we waiting for? Are there any issues that need to be escalated to me? Again, because everybody that's working with us is probably connected to a family member or a friend of mine. Right. I want to be sure that I am aware of absolutely everything that's happening. And sometimes I have something to add. Like I just reminded somebody, last week that, hey, when we do a camera scope, don't forget, we need to ask for permission to take the toilet off in somebody else's house. Right. And maybe I'm going to add value. Maybe I'm not, but at least I'm aware of everything that's happening.
Okay, cool. And is this a mandatory stand up?
It is. Yeah. Okay. Everybody from the buyer side. Now, if something happens and there's like a conflict because, I don't know, somebody's in the field on an inspection, sure, no problem, right? We'll tell them everything they need to know, or they can call in if they were really wanting to hear what was happening with a certain listing.
Okay. Is it virtual? You said in certain circumstances you can call in, but ideally if everyone is available, are you doing it via Zoom, in person?
Oh, yeah. No, Google Meet is fine. Okay. Yeah, we do Google Meet. It's really more informational. What are the milestones? What are the potential hiccups that we're going to have? And, if it needs to escalate to me. But this is another thing. Like if you don't have that meeting, are you really getting all the brains working on this problem? Because sometimes the listing team will say, hey, this just happened to us on the listing side. Buyer team, pay attention to this.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. A good way to share experience and lessons learned without having to experience that lessons learned yourself. If the listing team is passing it off to the buyer team, but when the
Yeah.
buyer team transitions to now I'm on the listing team, they, they might have caught it at that point in time and known, oh, this happened to one of your team members last year. I know how he or she handled it.
Like
So it's always good. Yeah.
listings
The
are
sharing
really
of
like,
knowledge.
oh, absolutely. And listings are a game of defense,
Right.
right? So listings are a game of defense, and you're talking to the offense about what to think about with the other team, not necessarily team's defense, but
Right.
preemptively, what would you like to tighten up about the contract before you get under contract as a listing agent?
Yeah. Another reason, kind of, to take this conversation full circle, you mentioned like being on defense, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have these systems and processes in place, you're making your defense a whole lot easier, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because you're proactively handling the biggest part, in my opinion, not only knowing what to do and not having to figure it out new every time, is that right there. You are taking proactive steps to make sure, because you've been around this business a lot and maybe the same thing keeps happening. You say, hey, this is crazy. Why has this happened 10 times in a row? I'm going to do A, B, and C. Then the next time it doesn't happen. And then the next time there's a new thing that happens, you put it into the process to circumvent that from ever happening in the first place, right?
Yeah. But and I always feel when I get into this conversation, I always feel like what's the goal? The goal is for the client to feel like everybody around them is relaxed and comfortable, knowledgeable, and that their experience is going to be managed precisely, and they're going to have a great experience every step of the way.
Yeah, we always said, or I always used to say, like, our systems and our processes should be such like that you're describing, where they're like thinking in their mind or actually verbally saying it, and to you or a testimonial will be like, that was like a fun experience. That was like such a smooth experience, not knowing all the hard work, dedication, system processes, and experience to get them to that point. But that's the ultimate goal, right?
Obviously, it should be invisible to them.
Yeah.
In some ways.
You don't want them to see you stressed. You don't want them to see you jumping through hoops or panicking, because that's what they're paying you for. So they don't have to.
You want to go into a doctor's office and see somebody freak out? That's not comforting. Yeah.
Exactly.
Or your accountant say, "Oh, I don't know what we're going to do here." That's not
right. Yeah, you're almost they're buying that from you in your years of experience. Like, it's always like, why am I paying a plumber $200 an hour to fix something in 15 minutes? Well, his argument and our argument is, well, my 20 years of experience allowed me to fix that in 15 minutes instead of 2 hours. So I'm in, I'm out. It's smooth. You get your toilet fixed. You get your house that you wanted without having to see what's happening behind the curtains. But being the owner and being, savvy enough with your systems, behind the curtains is actually like a smooth engine running on.
That's the goal.
Yeah. So it's very cool. I love talking about this kind of stuff. I'm really into playbooks and systems nowadays. This is like what I love doing. But I know you're a busy person, Jen, and I really appreciate you being on this episode today. If anyone is in the Austin, Texas neighborhood or thinking about moving there, I know there's a lot of cool things happening there. How can one get in touch with you?
So we have our website is berbasgroup.com, or they can email me at jen@berbasgroup.com. We're all in that inbox, so it won't get lost.
Literally all in that inbox.
We are all in that inbox. We also have an office line that we all get on our phones, and it's 512-655-3830.
Cool. Well, for those of you who need that information, it will be available in the description of this episode. So if you're in the Austin area or just want to talk systems and processes with Jen, that information will be there. Again, thank you so much for being here. I had a really fun time with you today.
Thanks. I had fun talking about systems with you too.
Yeah. All right. Bye. Take care. Bye.
Talk to you soon.